Nick. I'm joined as always by Zach, Brad, and Brock. We're here to recap UFC 250. Amanda Nunes defended her featherweight championship against, I don't even forget her name, Felicia Spencer. That was a very tough fight for her. Felicia Spencer, that is. I didn't really think much of her chances in the fight, but she withstood the 25 minutes from the greatest women's fighter we've ever seen. There are some other good men's bantamweight fights, but Brad, what do we think about Amanda Nunes here? Do we have any viable challengers anymore?
First off, Nick, before you get to Brad, though, how dare you forget her name after she took a beating for 5 rounds? You just to forget Felicia Spencer's name.
Yeah, the least I could do is remember her name, but yeah, it's just a question of where do we go from here? Because even on the broadcast last night, Daniel Cormier, Joe Rogan, they were just questioning if we even have any challengers left for Amanda Nunes at either weight class.
I think she should fight Brad.
They don't pay enough in the UFC. But yeah, she mauled her last night. And it's something to say that she has cleaned out 1.5 divisions, because we can't really say that 45 is a real division. But she's beaten every former women's champion in her 2 divisions, and there's not much coming up for her. I mean, there's a few girls coming up at 35 maybe that are a few fights away. But she's also previously talked about retiring, and her fiance, Nina Ansaroff, is pregnant, so maybe she does want to be done.
Yeah, it might be one of the only things left is to have like a rebirthing of the division, because with a champion literally so dominant that we're sitting here, they're talking about having Valentina fight her again, but they were saying that might not be able to be a viable option because Amanda Nunes is getting too big for 135 and Valentina is a true 125er, so even that's out of the question. So maybe that is the answer, Brad, is Amanda Nunes walks away from the sport. Her legacy is obviously very intact. She is the definite GOAT, but there wasn't much to say last night. She did her thing. She looked absolutely dominant, didn't make any mistakes, and Felicia Spencer didn't offer any kind of adversity or trouble to her. So I really don't think there's much else to say on that phenomenal performance, but I did want to move on to the co-main event, which was Cody Garbrandt versus Rafael Assunção. You know, Cody Garbrandt, we've seen where he's coming from, where he's coming off of 3 straight knockout losses, 2 to TJ Dillashaw and then 1 against Pedro Munoz. So there were so many questions going into this fight as far as, is Cody's chin going to hold up? Did that layoff affect him in a bad or good way? We saw that he went to go train with Mark Henry for this fight instead of doing a full camp at Alpha Male. So, Brock, I wanted to go to you because I know you're a big Garbrandt guy. I was very hesitant to think that Garbrandt was going to win this fight simply because of everything leading up to it, not because I questioned his skills, not because, I questioned his heart or anything like that, but coming off of those losses and now moving into a new stage of his life, having a kid and taking a lot of time off, did you really think he was going to go out there and look that good?
I think I had this discussion with Zach or maybe it was Brad. I can't remember, but I shared the exact same concerns you did. I was worried he was going to still be like a hot-headed fighter, swing for the fences and not defend himself. The typical shit we got used to with him. But then there was that side of me that I was like, well, damn, like he's making all these changes and he seems completely refocused. Maybe he comes back as that guy that fight Dominic Cruz and just absolutely demolishes a division. And I mean, really, like that version of Cody Garbrandt might be unbeatable. Really, I mean, his grappling's there. His stand-up's looking phenomenal. And now that he's training with, who's it? Mark Henry, right?
Yeah.
Mark Henry.
Mark Henry Almeida.
Jersey. Isn't he in New Jersey where Frankie Edgar trains?
With Ricardo Almeida, Mark Henry. But he also does work with Alpha Male still.
Right. Yeah, man, I thought it was great. It was.
Go ahead.
I mean, let's be real. We know why Cody Garbrandt's chin held up better. Had reinforcement. He grew reinforcement for his chin to be able to take that. No, but the way that Cody baited a Sun Sao in and then hit him with that right hit him. I mean, the way he dipped and turned, it looked like he was like turning around to pick up a brick off the ground.
Yeah.
And then swung around and hit a Sun Sao with that thing. And right at the bell like that, I mean,
Beautiful.
it might be as good as Masvidal's instant KO. You know what I mean? Right at the bell or right before the bell, they're both. You know, there was a split second where I thought it might have been at the bell, but when I watched the replay and you could clearly see him connect with that punch as the horn gets sounded. So, I mean, there's no better. I mean, that was like a Mark Hunt style walk away KO.
Yeah, even before that, man, even before the knockout punch, he was looking lights out up until then, where he had a Sun Sao really just out of his game, where he couldn't even figure out how to get within range. You could tell he was staying beyond kicking range. He didn't like want to rush in too far. And
Sun Sao looked to me like he had prepared for Cody of the past.
yes.
And what I mean by that is Sun Sao was fighting with his hands low, and it seemed like he was trying to bait Cody into like some of those more violent brawls and exchanges. And they had like 2 or 3 of them, but and for a second there, Cody seemed like he was going to fall into that again, but then got his distance back, you know, started, you know, peppering from the outside a little bit more, and, you know, obviously got away with the win. But it seemed to me like a Sun Sao was trying to draw Cody in to try and get in some ridiculous exchange with him and put him away, and Cody wasn't buying it.
So Brock, I mean, being a Garbrandt guy, it's crazy how quickly things can change, how the narrative changes. Where if he loses last night, we're probably talking about possible retirement and things like that. But now he gets this huge knockout win over a top 5 perennial contender in Hassan Sao. Do we see Garbrandt in the title picture very soon?
I would be really excited to see that. I was nervous as well. I was like, well, this is either going to be the end of his career or this is going to be like a rebirthing of his career and he's going to go on a great title run. And if he can continue to fight how he did last night against these top guys, I don't see any reason why he can't be champion. I mean, he looked fucking phenomenal. He was dancing around the Sun Sao like he did to Dominic Cruz. He was technically sound on the feet and on the ground for the little bit of scrambling that went down. But overall, he just looked fucking excellent. Like, he looked like the man last night.
This is the performance I wanted to see in Garbrandt's return. This is the performance I was hoping for in his last 2 fights, honestly. But this is what we needed to see from Cody coming back, and because he has the movement, his footwork, his head movement, it's always been really great and technical. I remember back in the Thomas Almeida fight, there was the question of which of these surging knockout artists can win, and I was like, clearly the one that uses any defense. And like Cody slipped and destroyed Almeida, and that began his run up to the title. And now we see him looking like he did back then. That's really what I was hoping he would look like in a return.
Yeah, with the skill set that Garbrandt has, I feel like it's just one of those situations where the only person that could beat Garbrandt is maybe himself, because we all know, it's common knowledge, the emotion going into the Dillashaw fights. And maybe there wasn't as much animosity with Pedro Munoz, but you could tell he just wasn't the same guy. But when he is on, I feel like Garbrandt might possibly be the best bantamweight in the world. But
ooh, that's a bold statement considering how stacked that bantamweight division is now.
yeah, it's a murder row now.
It might be the most exciting division in the UFC at this point. I mean, for sure, right now, top 1 or 2. Yeah,
it's getting there. Yeah.
Right now, it's got to be the most exciting division because you've got a title fight coming up, and you just saw 3 contenders emerge last night, all with finishes in the main card of a pay-per-view early in their fights. Like, you've got a lot of competition coming up.
So speaking of some of those other bantamweight contenders, Sugar Sean Malley. Whoo! That
Aljamain.
boy, he's the next rotation of super high level talent. I think that
And I
guy's
think
got.
I really do want to like bet on this, double down that I think he is going to be bantamweight champion one day. It seems like Zach, we were talking about it last night, and we talked about it over and over again. What you call the magic, and I think it's something special with this kid, where
Well,
he
look at what
just
he did. You know, Eddie Wineland is a veteran of the sport, a very good striker, and Sean O'Malley just hypnotized him with just some little subtle hand and feints, and then blasted him with a straight right hand, no wind up, clean on the chin. I mean, those Irish guys know how to punch you in the chin.
yeah,
For
he's got the
sure.
touch of death. That's another thing you talk about, where it like he doesn't even seem like he's punching that hard. It's like the timing and the placement of his shots. They're so deadly, man.
Yeah, I mean, you can throw a ridiculous like Dan Henderson, Cody Garbrandt, roaring, punch at a guy. But the thing is, like, there's some wind up to them. I mean, obviously Cody, I mean, he dipped and turned and like it worked, I guess, because he was up against the cage and Sun Sao just kept coming forward. But I mean, there was a lot of telegraphing to that punch and that wind up. Dan Henderson would always hide it behind like a little shuffle and an inside leg kick before he threw that big right hand. But the way Sean O'Malley just, I mean, there was no wind up at all. It was clean. It was like a piston just came straight out, hit him right on the chin at perfect range, and came back. And, Sean even knew before Wineland hit the ground. I mean, Wineland was looking off into the shadow realm before the ref even got there. And that's why Sean O'Malley didn't even need to follow up anything. He just, like Mark Hunt of the past, held his hand up. That guy's gone.
It was crazy, man, because he streams Call of Duty on Twitch. I got on there for a few minutes last week, and I said, "Get the walk off, man, get the walk off." And he's like, "Oh shit, I'll try, man." I think I might have been his good luck charm there. I really didn't think he was gonna knock out Wineland like that, especially that early. But he
Yeah, I
impresses
mean,
me more and more every
Wineland
time.
looked like he was definitely in the fight up until that point. You know what I mean? He had thrown some good counter shots to Sean. Um, Sean likes to stay in kicking range and throw some of those body kicks and leg kicks and stuff like that. But Eddie looked like he was firmly in control, and we were going to have a scrap on our hands. And then he drops his hands a little bit for that uppercut feint that O'Malley was thinking about throwing. He throws the left hand with the right behind it, and the rest is history.
So there are countless bantamweight marquee matchups, and we were talking about Garbrandt. We were talking about the Sugar Show, which both those guys phenomenal performances, and they're even talking about matching those two up together. I think that might be a little too soon for Mr. O'Malley, but we will see. You never know with the matchups in the UFC. But one more bantamweight matchup I wanted to talk about. My absolute favorite bantamweight out of all of them, Aljamain Sterling. He was not going to be denied last night, and he was going against a very tough guy in Corey Sandhagen. Brad, I know you were talking about how you were very high on Sandhagen. I was scared for Aljo going into that fight, but Aljo made that his fight quickly, taking the back and just giving Sandhagen no room to breathe, literally and figuratively. What did you think of that, man?
I was incredibly impressed. Obviously, although I was on Sandhagen, he's been rising up through the division. He's looked great. I obviously accepted that Aljo could have done exactly what he did, although I didn't expect him to dominate Corey like that. I mean, I can't say anything other than that I'm extremely impressed by how dominant Aljamain was and how he was able to secure the submission in the first round.
Yeah, so they're talking about because I don't know if it's been made official for a card yet, but Peter Yan's could be fighting Jose Aldo for the vacant belt.
Yes.
I've definitely been impressed with Peter Yan's rise to the top, but
Hold up, Nick. I really want to go back to Aljamain Sterling real quick.
Yeah.
And just touch on again what he did. And for any of you aspiring jiu-jitsu players out there, or people that are looking to get into grappling, or even you white belts and blue belts out there, go back and watch Aljamain Sterling and watch that sequence 20 times in a row, because that was a master class on the levels that are in this game. Go back and watch Chase Hooper's fight against Alex Caceres, and look how many times Chase Hooper got the back, and they were in a standing position, and Chase struggled to get onto Caceres' back. He could not get that other hook in. He kept sliding off. Caceres would break away, and they were back to striking. When Aljamain Sterling took that guy's back, when he took Sandhagen's back, he got those hooks in immediately. As they're going to the ground, he's locking up the neck as he's putting the body triangle in all at the same time. There are two battles going on in that exchange. There's a battle for the neck, and there's a battle for the legs. And he's winning both battles at the same time. And Sandhagen is, he's only fighting the neck, which, to his credit, is what you really need to fight. You need to get that arm off of your neck. But where Aljamain Sterling shows a high level of jiu-jitsu that you don't see at a lot of guys is while he's distracting Sandhagen with that choke attempt, he's locking up his lower body with that body triangle. And then by the time they get to the ground, I mean, even if the choke doesn't come on immediately, you're stuck in that position. There's no clearing the hook and getting your hips out and just, turning in or something like that. No, he's got you locked in that body triangle, and you are in a world of hurt. I mean, Brock is a high-level purple belt. He could attest to this too. It's to get to that next level, you have to be able to do multiple things at once. I mean, Brock,
Yeah,
you
man.
feel the same way?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it was really impressive to watch, and it shows you where he comes from. He comes from Matt Serra, Ray Longo, those guys. It's really impressive to see the product that Matt Serra and Ray Longo are still able to produce. And even maybe a year or two ago, me and Nick were calling for Aljo to potentially have a title shot. I mean, he's been right there for so long. And for whatever reason, it just has never worked out to where he gets the title shot or gets that fight for the title shot. I mean, it's how it goes. It's business. But especially right now, it's extremely impressive to see that with such a high level talent pool at that weight. Arguably, the top 10, maybe even top 15 of 135 pounds could all be champion. They're all so damn good. I mean, it's like on any given day, one of those guys can beat the other. And for you to have an impressive win like that, it helps build your argument a lot more.
I mean, imagine the barn burner that Cody Garbrandt, Aljamain Sterling would be.
I would pay so much money to see just that fight.
Like,
I would pay
imagine
the
that
$70
as
to see just
yeah.
that.
I mean, that could very well be a title fight, but it's going to end up being the co-main event. I'm sure a fight like that deserves to be on, a championship bout. If I'm
For
Dana
sure.
White, if I'm, Sean Shelby and those guys, I make Habib versus Gagey, and I put the co-main event Garbrandt Sterling.
Oh my God, man! I wouldn't even. I'd pay so much money, man. To see something like that, it would be awesome.
Yeah, I agree that would be a very entertaining fight. You can make probably many good bantamweight matchups because it's just you throw any guy against any guy. But I think last night was proof that Aljamain Sterling should be in the title picture. He should be the one fighting Peter Yan. All due respect to Jose Aldo, because I do think he should have gotten the decision over Marlon Moraes. But I think Aljamain Sterling's performance last night and his verbal statement afterwards was that he is the one that should be fighting for that belt. And, he chokes out Corey Sandhagen, who's surging, and then he gets up and he immediately starts screaming, "Where are you at, Dana? Where are you at?" And I think that was just perfect depiction of the emotions of the moment where, yes, that was Corey Sandhagen is a tough fight for anybody, but I think Aljo proved long ago that he deserved to be in that title shot, and he proved it even more last night. And he exceeded a lot of people's expectations, even mine. I am a huge Aljo guy, but he went above and beyond what I thought he was going to do last night.
Oh, I'll tell you what. I mean, I could 100% see the argument for Aljo having the shot against
Yan.
the winner of Yan or Aldo. But at the same time, like, how long would he have to wait for that fight? And then you could obviously run like, Sean O'Malley against Cody Garbrandt. There you have two guys there who are, who are kind of making an argument for a title shot. And the winner of that gets the winner of Aljo versus whoever wins, Aldo and Jan.
When it comes to the Sugar Show, I'm really conflicted because I think even his mindset, he was very verbal about not wanting to rush into top 5 fights, especially since he's not getting paid like a top bantamweight. I mean, Brock, what do you think? I know you're big on the Sugar Show as well, but do you think that maybe we should pump the brakes on having him fight, former champions and top contenders?
I agree with you. Yeah, for sure. I don't know if he's ready for that top 5 fight yet, especially financially. If you're not getting paid the big dollars yet, why are you going to fight the big money fights? I totally understand that. I respect it. I think for his career and to create more of a title contendership argument, he should probably take another 2 fights, maybe 2 fight. I mean, he's still really young. We also got to remember that he's a really young guy. He could probably take another 2 fights before he really steps up into that top 3 to top 5 contendership space. And I'm still going to be high on him and still feel comfortable with that. I think that's going to help build his confidence. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, man. It's so stacked. I'd like to see how it all plays out.
So, off the heels of that, I wanted to cover something real quick because 2 of the last podcasts we were covering, fighter pay and fighters trying to negotiate for more money. You have John Jones trying to negotiate more, especially if he's going to fight Francis Ngannou. You have Jorge Masvidal being very vocal these days, even asking for his release. I think he's serious about that. And a lot of people just being very defiant. Sean O'Malley asking for more money at his young age. Brad, we were talking about this numerous times, but I feel like we might be onto something as far as fighters banding together because we've always talked about it. If we truly want change, we need a union because the UFC has all the leverage, but it seems like we do have an uprising in fighters speaking their minds at least.
Yeah, it's refreshing to see the top level guys starting to say, look, you need to pay me what I'm worth, and so on and so forth. And a fighters association would make sense. Every other major sport at this level has a collective bargaining association for the athletes. I think it would make sense. I mean, there's a lot of conflict historically between whether or not fighters are employees or independent contractors. And I feel like it would be better for all parties involved if it was a more settled thing. If coming into your first fight, you had a fighters association that is guaranteed that you make 15 and 15 or whatever it happens to be. I don't know what the correct number should or would be, but it seems like just like rookies have minimum deals in the NFL and the NBA, there should be some sort of equivalency in the UFC would seem more equal for everyone else.
Yeah, I do. At the end of the day, I always love when athletes are gonna, fight the power a little bit because it seemed like for far too long, even before the talks of the union, there was no bargaining, there was no fighting the power because even fighters they didn't even go to test free agency. They would just re-sign their UFC deals, and that was the norm. And then you saw, fighter by fighter, a lot of guys. Benson Henderson comes to mind, Phil Davis, guys like that. They went to free agency, and then Bellator paid them more. So that was definitely a start of something big with that because there was no, arguing for the other side, no contest for the fighters. It's all about the fighters. And
Nick,
yeah.
I kind of look at it like this. Like I can understand the free agent thing versus the employee thing, but if you're going to consider these guys, independent contractors or whatever, then each guy should be signing. Every fight should be a new deal then and a new contract. if you're going to sign these guys to multi-fight deals, then they're employees.
Yes.
You know, if it's every fight, you know, it's where we're going to hash this out again. You know what I mean? Then that's fine. Then I would be like, yeah, they're not employees because you hash out a new contract every time they get together and put a new fight together, which I'm not totally against. You know, every fight is different. You know, it's a different opponent. It's a different camp. You know, but then I can also understand that the UFC wants to be able to hold on to guys and develop guys. And I think that's a good thing, you know, development of young talent, you know, to keep the sport thriving. But if you're going to do that, then you need to include them in the profit revenue
That's my criticism of this whole thing of the independent contractor debate is I feel like when it comes Dana specifically, but when the UFC talks about fighters being independent contractors, it's only in certain aspects where it's convenient for the UFC. Like you're saying, that's honestly a really good point that if they're independent contractors, they shouldn't be contractually obligated to only fight in the UFC. Jorge Masvidal was saying, if I'm an independent contractor, why can't I go fight elsewhere? Because that sounds like something that independent contractors should be able to do. But it's like I said, it's when it's convenient for the UFC that the certain aspects of fighters being employees and certain aspects of them being independent contractors. But
yeah, if I'm like a Conor McGregor type guy, or even John Jones, or any of, you know, Jorge Masvidal even is getting to this echelon because of how popular he's become. I only signed one fight contracts. Every time I fight, we go back to the table and we renegotiate because things change. You know, public perception changes. You know, who Jorge Masvidal was before he knocked out Ben Askren versus who he is now is not even comparable.
yeah, that was one of the main issues with Sean O'Malley is, you know, he wants to negotiate a new deal, but he signed a 6-fight deal, and some people are, you know, criticizing that. It's almost like he didn't bet on himself and sign a shorter fight deal. But
He
the thing
signed a
is,
Scottie Pippen contract. You know,
yeah,
Scottie Pippen signed for, you know, 6 years, 18 million. And then the Bulls start winning all these championships and he starts complaining about his financial situation.
yeah, it becomes one of those things because I'm sure if he signed a shorter fight deal, he wouldn't have gotten much bread on each fight. It's very complicated. When the fighters aren't completely band together, it makes for a very complicated situation when you want more money. But I wanted to move on to one last thing before we wrap this up. I don't know how much to make of this because we've seen this before. Conor McGregor apparently last night, I didn't see the tweet yet, but apparently he announced his retirement loosely again, just like he did back in 2016.
So, Nick, he put up a tweet of him and his mother after one of his fights and them celebrating and basically thanked her and, you know, said that he was retiring. And then this morning tweeted another photo of what looked to be some type of homemade cake. And written on it was "Happy Retirement, Daddy" or something like that. So it looked like, you know, his kids or something did that for him. So that's two things now. And anyway, like you were saying, this might be for real.
Yeah, Brad, I'll start with you. I want to get everybody's opinion on this. Do you even put any weight on this? Do you believe this?
Is he retired now? Maybe. Is he considering himself retired? Sure. Is he retired forever? Do I think he'll never fight again? No. I think he'll definitely fight again. But for now, he might be retired. He might be done until he gets what he likes or something changes. But I think he'll definitely fight again. I can't say when.
Yeah, I happen to think it's more of like a negotiation tactic, like kind of what Masvidal's doing, but like on a grander scale, maybe like he's going a little harder with it. I really just think he wants more money for whatever they're trying to give him or whatever he wants. And back to Masvidal, right? So like, even with both guys, you're gonna call them an independent contractor, but you know, like we said, you're not gonna allow them to fight anywhere else. They have to fight who you tell them to fight, really, unless it's all money, right? So financially, if they only want to pay you X amount of money to fight this top guy, but you feel like this is a top guy, I should be making top guy money. They don't really care. And like And if you don't want to fight for that amount of money, they don't care. They'll shelf you for the rest of your contract. They don't care. They'll shelf you, or they'll go out of their way. If you're not an employee, how can they extend your contract and stop you from fighting elsewhere if you're not an employee? If you're an independent contractor, like every other part of the world and every other place in the world, an independent contractor can put bids out and receive offers from anybody for anything. You shouldn't have to be stuck with somebody. That's fine. Like if you sign a 6-fight deal and you want to agree to this amount of money, well, then you're an employee and you deserve X, Y, and Z. You shouldn't be able to the company shouldn't be able to call you an independent contractor, but then have full control of you as if you're an employee. I think the contracts and shit involved in it are so ridiculous, man. It's so outdated. I mean, you got unions in pretty much every sport everywhere, and it seems like MMA can never break through. I mean, a few years ago, Mark Hunt started that like big lawsuit with the UFC, and ultimately, I believe he lost it because nobody was going to back him. You're not going to find another active UFC fighter or UFC fighter in hopes of getting some sort of job after their career attempting to like badmouth the UFC and kind of like come after them to help out current fighters because they're scared they're going to get fucked. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You're not going to get that help. Because look at Mark Hunt now. Mark Hunt's going to be like blacklisted. He'll never fight again or do anything unless he goes to like Bellator or something. But I mean, regardless, I think he's done anyways. But
Yeah, it's one of those where I see a lot of fighters sticking up for the UFC, and I feel there is a ulterior motive behind that because it's like they want to get in good graces with the company. Like you're saying, you get blacklisted. And when Masvidal was speaking out, I saw so many lower level fighters speaking in favor of the UFC. It was kind of irritating, to be honest, because I see I think what Masvidal is doing is good for the fighters, and maybe some fighters just don't realize that if they're happy with their contracts, then so be it. But to speak in favor of the company against the fighters, that does kind of bug me. But
Well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, the fighters, I think this, especially this pandemic, kind of showed us that the product and what we are all paying to see is the fighters. You know, it's not the arena, it's not the crowd, it's not really the UFC. You know, Conor McGregor, if he came out on his Twitter and said, I'm going to fight this guy, you know, whatever famous fighter, you know, pick whoever you like. You know, I'm going to fight Nate Diaz in my backyard and I'm going to live stream it and you know, pay $60 and you can watch it. It would get just as many views as if he was fighting Nate Diaz in the UFC. If he was like, we're going to fight by the, you know, unified rules of MMA, we're going to fight in my backyard in a, you know, in another, you know, circle cage like Bellator or whatever, just, you know, to keep from copyright infringement on the octagon. Everybody would watch. Everybody. We don't, you know, and that's
arguably,
proof
yeah.
that you don't need the UFC. We need great fighters and great fights to happen, and the UFC helps facilitate that for sure. You know what I mean? We probably wouldn't get, you know, boxing has showed us that when everybody's an independent contractor, you don't get the fights that you want to see. You know, look how long it took for Pacquiao to fight Mayweather. You know what I mean? Look how long, you know, it took for the Gypsy Queen to fight Deontay Wilder. You know what I mean? It took a while to put those on, you know, because people are always going to go back and argue and, you know, and it's never the right time for certain people. The UFC helps put on quality fights all the time. And we get multiple cards a year that have all have ridiculous fights on them. So that is a good thing, but there definitely needs to be a more cohesive plan to get these guys paid based upon their viewership. You know, people are paying to see Conor McGregor. They're not paying to see Dana White, unfortunately, at the end of the day.
Max, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, so I was watching, this is actually wrestling related. I was watching a thing called Dark Side of the Ring, and they did a thing on there where they talked to this guy who back in the 80s did a very similar thing where wrestlers were not getting health insurance and not getting fair pay. Very similar situation. And he didn't have the backing, just like this, like where he was like, hey, I believe everybody should get health insurance and should get paid for, you know, destroying their body. and no one was backing him. He had the support of literally no one because they were afraid of losing their jobs and not getting work because they're standing up. This guy ended up tarnishing his career entirely because no one wanted to book him because he did this big ass publicity stunt almost. And it's a very similar situation if you want to, try to read up on it. I can't remember the guy's name.
Yeah,
but
we've seen that in the UFC already with Leslie Smith and others that have spoken up, usually towards the end of their careers, because they don't want to lose the ability to continue to fight.
Exactly.
So before we finish wrapping up, we got a couple minutes left. What's Tim Sylvia? I don't know if you've seen anything recently on his Instagram.
Yes.
So that was Frank Mir. Frank Mir armbarred and broke his arm, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
He had a bunch of screws put in his arm. He's posting on Instagram and shit. The screws are backing out of the bone in his arms and penetrating through his skin and infecting him. And it was technically like a workers' comp issue when it originally happened, right? Because he's an independent contractor with the UFC, blah, blah, blah. They fix it, right? Now he's making posts kind of talking about how, like, well, 12 years ago, whatever it was, when this happened, you guys wanted to consider me an employee. This got fixed under like a workman's comp type deal. And now that I need it fixed again, you're not helping me at all. I got to come out of pocket like 30 grand, whatever crazy, medical expense it is. You see it a lot more often. And it's like, even the older fighters, like the guys that wouldn't have spoken up, it's kind of starting to bite them in the ass now.
Yeah.
Good point, Brock.
That is a very good point. And for now, that's going to do it for us today. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, like and share the video. For Brock, for Nick, for Zach, and for Max, this is the Matt Time Podcast, and next time we will see you on the mat.